Breaking news from December 29, 2025. Ukraine's Unmanned Systems Forces destroy several key Russian targets in Crimea, including advanced Valdai radar. Goal.
Subscribe to Defense Reports, your go-to source for timely, in-depth military and defense reports. I'm Alex. Join me with Arya in the latest podcast by Defense Report for sharp, no-nonsense breakdowns of the latest in global defense news, military technology, and strategic developments.
And today we're going to cover a major incident near the settlement of Chernomorsk in Crimea. Ukraine has successfully neutralized one of Russia's most advanced counter-drone systems, and they did it with their own domestically produced drones.
And this wasn't just any system. We're talking about the Valdai multi-role radar system. This is Russia's state-of-the-art answer to small drones. It has 3D X-band radar, EW integration. It was purpose-built to stop exactly the kind of attack that just destroyed it.
Exactly. It was supposed to detect something like a Mavic-class drone up to 6 kilometers away. So for it to be taken out is, well, it's more than just a tactical loss. It's a huge statement.
Which brings us right to the heart of our debate today. Does this event signal that Ukraine is achieving a decisive technological overmatch in drone warfare? Or is this just an expected tactical success in a conflict that's still fundamentally defined by a brutal, grinding war of attrition?
Well, I'm going to argue that this is clear confirmation of a meaningful and frankly a scaling technological advantage for Ukraine, one that's rooted in a much more agile and adaptive innovation cycle.
And I'll be countering that. While this is a significant blow, it remains a tactical fluctuation. It doesn't fundamentally change the strategic reality, which is still driven by Russia's massive resource advantage and the sheer grind on the front lines. Okay?
So, for me, this strike is a complete validation of Ukraine's entire deep strike strategy. The destruction of the Valdai system, and we're getting reports that drones first had to breach its protective dome before hitting the internal components in the command post. That points to a critical systemic failure in Russia's defenses. It really shows that Ukraine's homegrown agile industrial base is it's out-innovating Russia's top-tier CUAS systems. I mean, the Valdai only entered service in 2021. It's their newest tech.
Mm-hmm.
And yet, Ukraine's drone ecosystem, which can move from a prototype to a combat-ready weapon in, a few weeks, it's creating systems that just completely bypass it. And these tactical successes, they're starting to add up. They are strategically eroding Russia's control over Crimea and the Black Sea by just systematically picking apart these high-value targets.
I see it differently. I mean, I approach this from a different perspective. Of course, it's a tactical loss, a significant one. But we have to be careful not to mistake it for a strategic shift. This technological race, it's cyclical. It's an offense-defense spiral. Offensive tools, especially cheap ones, will always find ways to temporarily beat defensive systems. That's just the nature of it.
But this feels different.
Well, let me finish. The core dynamic of this war hasn't changed. It's about attrition. It's about scale. Russia's response to its early failures was what you could call an industrial strategy from the Urals, a huge, centralized push for high-volume production. And that's what enables these massive attack waves we're seeing, like that recent night with over 500 drones. That sheer volume, that ability to launch hundreds of these things every single day, that's the real strategic driver. And it's designed to overwhelm any single technological advantage Ukraine might gain. And besides, the main military problem for Ukraine right now is in the Donbass. It's the grinding Russian offensive around Pokrovsk. Destroying one radar in Crimea, however advanced, doesn't stop thousands of troops from trying to break through the front line.
Okay, but the failure of the Valdai is so specific, so telling. Its complexity was supposed to be its strength. That 3D X-band radar offers incredible resolution, perfect for spotting these tiny drones. The fact that it failed against a coordinated attack, it reveals a serious flaw. The Unmanned Systems Forces didn't just get lucky. They used multiple drones, these FP1 and FP2 types, in a sequence. One to take out the physical protection, the dome, and then others to go for the kill. That's not luck, that's superior operational planning. It's a specific counter-doctrine. And beyond that, Ukraine is building autonomy into these systems, AI-equipped drones that can finish their attack run even if Russian EW cuts the signal. That resilience is a genuine, sustainable edge.
The sustainability is exactly what I question, though. Look, you're right about the sophistication of the Valdai, but that very complexity is also its weakness. When a multi-million-dollar defense system can be neutralized by a few drones that cost, less than $1,000 apiece? The strategic implication there goes beyond just good planning. It points to a systemic and economic asymmetry, where the offense has this massive cost advantage. The lesson isn't just that Russia failed here. The lesson might be that CUAS technology itself, as it currently exists, is just too expensive and brittle to reliably defend fixed targets against these kinds of low-cost layered attacks. Russia can afford to lose a few of these radars, but the underlying economic problem for defenders remains.
But I'd argue Russia's focus on quantity is a symptom of its own technological lag. It's a reactive strategy. They launch hundreds of Shaheds just to force Ukraine to use up expensive air defense missiles. But Ukraine has already countered that. They're scaling up production of their own interceptor drones, which cost around 3,000 euros. That completely changes the cost per kill ratio compared to a $100,000 missile. The real strategic lever for Ukraine is this ability to consistently hit irreplaceable targets deep behind the lines. You can't just quickly rebuild a Valdai radar or a major oil refinery. That's how you degrade their war machine.
I'm just not convinced a better intercept ratio changes the strategic trajectory when your opponent's resource base is simply bigger. If Ukraine needs 1,000 interceptors to stop a wave of 800 Russian drones, the logistical burden is still immense, and it favors the side with the bigger industrial base. And Russia is innovating tactically where it counts most, on the ground. They're using these light infantry groups on motorbikes to bypass the FPV drone death zones on the Donbass. It's like a bizarre return to warfare on bicycles. It just proves that air domain tech superiority isn't everything. Tactical innovation on the ground can mitigate it, and that allows Russia to keep grinding out those territorial gains. And that brings us back to the central disagreement. The loss of a radar in Crimea, yes, it's a blow to the Black Sea Fleet's protection, but it doesn't solve Ukraine's immediate defensive problems on the front.
Russia has, over 100,000 troops concentrated on that Prokhorovsk axis. That's the strategic center of gravity right now. If that line collapses, it threatens Ukraine's entire defensive belt in the east. These brutal, grinding battles for a few kilometers of ground, that is what's dictating the pace of the war. Not a drone strike hundreds of kilometers away.
I see why you think that, but arguing the strikes in Crimea are irrelevant just underestimates how interconnected modern war is. C4ISR, Command, Control, Intelligence. It's all linked. These strikes in Crimea provide essential operational relief. When you degrade Russia's reconnaissance in Chornomorsk, you reduce the threat in the Black Sea, and you complicate their logistics. Disabling a key intelligence asset like the Valdai forces them to operate blind, or to pull other high-value assets from other fronts to cover the gap. That creates a systemic drain. Those large-scale offensives in the Donbass, they absolutely depend on secure rear areas and reliable intelligence. So hitting them deep absolutely does impact their ability to sustain those frontal assaults.
That assumes their ground assaults depend on that kind of sophisticated rear area intelligence for minute-to-minute success. The fighting in the Donbass right now is mostly artillery and infantry waves. The momentum there is driven by manpower and shells, not the Valdai radar. We have to distinguish between creating long-term risk for Russia and providing immediate relief for the troops on the front line. And until these deep strikes start severing the railway lines that feed the Donbass front, they will, in my view, remain secondary.
I just counter by saying the goal is to make the whole operational environment untenable for them. The loss of the Valdai, combined with everything else, forces Russia into this costly defensive crouch in Crimea, diverting resources that could be in Donetsk, and on a global stage, it sends a clear signal. Ukraine is mastering this domain. It forces Russia to rethink its entire security architecture, and that is a strategic victory in itself.
And I'd say strategic victory is measured in territory held. Tech provides incredible tools, but it hasn't solved the fundamental resource disparity. This strike it's an important data point. It confirms Ukraine's adaptive genius, but the war is still being fought where that engineering meets Russia's overwhelming industrial scale. And right now, it seems to me that scale and attrition are still winning the moment.
So, to summarize my position, The Valdai's destruction confirms that Ukraine's fast, decentralized tech development is giving it a sustained edge. It shows that superior innovation can counter a massive resource advantage in key areas, forcing the enemy to pull resources from the main front and creating real strategic effects.
And I would maintain that while these tactical victories are impressive and sophisticated, the fundamental strategic challenge remains the sheer volume of Russia's industrial capacity and its willingness to absorb incredible losses for marginal gains on the front line. Innovation complicates things for Russia, but the strategic momentum is still, I think, defined by attrition.
It really highlights the dual nature of this conflict, doesn't it? You have this highly advanced technological war happening in the rear, and at the same time, a brutal, almost World War I style war of attrition on the ground. Which of those dynamics, adaptive innovation or industrial scale, will ultimately prove decisive? Well, that remains the central question. You've been listening to Defense Report by Alex and Aria, where we analyze the latest in military strategy, global defense, and advanced weaponry. Subscribe to Defense Reports, your go-to source for timely, in-depth military and defense reports. We'll catch you next time.